Today, we are taking a close look at a new study that might just change the game for how we predict solar cycles. A paper by Luo and his colleagues offers up a solution for a major headache in modeling the sun's magnetic field, a problem that, it turns out, has been systematically throwing off our predictions for years. All right, here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll talk about the standard model we use for the sun's surface. Then, we'll pinpoint a really big problem in how it simplifies reality. After that, we'll actually measure the error this simplification is causing. And then we'll get to the really cool part, the elegant solution the paper proposes. We'll wrap it all up with what this means for future simulations. So, first things first, let's talk about the main tool we all use for simulating the sun's magnetic surface. Okay, so at the heart of all this is the surface flux transport model, or SFT. You know it. It's the workhorse for figuring out how the sun's large-scale magnetic field changes over time. But the SFT model needs good input. It needs source terms, which are basically the new magnetic fields that bubble up from inside the sun. You know, the complex, messy sunspots we call active regions. And this slide right here, this shows you the core problem perfectly. On the left, that's a magnetography of a real active region. It's complex, it's messy, it's irregular. And on the right, that's how we often represent it in our models, as a nice, clean, perfectly symmetric bipolar magnetic region, or BMR. So the big question driving this whole study is, what exactly are we losing when we make that simplification? So let's get into the nitty-gritty of how researchers actually do this simplification, and, why it's kind of a double-edged sword. The SFT code here uses what's called spherical harmonic decomposition. The best way to think about it is like trying to describe a really complex shape, like a mountain, using a combination of much simpler shapes, like spheres and donut shapes. It's a way to turn that messy magnetic map into something we can actually work with mathematically. Now, for efficiency, the simulations are run on a standard grid, and they're cut off at a harmonic degree of 60. This is a super important trade-off, right? It lets us capture the big, important features without getting so bogged down in the tiny details that the simulation would take forever to run. And this brings us right to the central question of the whole paper. Look, simplifying things into these neat, symmetric BMRs is efficient. Nobody's arguing that. But is that efficiency coming at the cost of accuracy? Are we basically baking a fundamental error into our models from the very beginning? So, to figure this out, the researchers did the obvious thing. They ran two different sets of simulations. One used the old simplified symmetric sources, and the other used data from realistic active regions. And let me tell you, the difference was, well, it was striking. Here it is, the money quote from the paper. Using those tidy, symmetric BMRs leads to a, and this is the key phrase, systematic overestimation of the axial dipole strength. Now, why does that matter? Because the axial dipole, the sun's main north-south magnetic field, its strength at the end of one solar cycle is literally the best predictor we have for how strong the next cycle will be. So if we're getting this number wrong, we're in big trouble. This graph just lays it all out there. See the black line? That's the real observed data from the sun. Now look at all the colored lines. Those are the simulations that use the simplified symmetric DMRs. It's not even close. They all dramatically overshoot reality. The model is just fundamentally missing the mark. And here are the hard numbers. I mean, just look at that relative error. When you use the realistic active region data, the simulation error is tiny. We're talking 2–3%. But with the symmetric BMRs, whoa, the error explodes. It's over 160% in one case and almost 74% in another. This isn't a small discrepancy, you guys. This is a massive failure of the approximation. So the researchers thought, okay, well, maybe we just need to make the symmetric models smaller. They tried it. They decreased the size coefficient K. And yeah, it helped a little bit, but the overestimation was still huge. It was pretty clear at that point that just fiddling with the size was not going to solve the core problem. And that leads us directly to the paper's main contribution, a new, much more realistic way to approximate these regions, one that brings in a key feature of how they actually look. The solution, it turns out, is asymmetry. See, in real active regions, the two magnetic polarities, they aren't twins. The leading polarity, the one pointed in the direction of the sun's rotation, it tends to be more compact. Meanwhile, the following polarity is usually more spread out and a bit larger. So the researchers built this observation into their model by adding a new parameter, f, which is just the size ratio between the two.
In the old symmetric model, F is always 1.
And you can see the difference so clearly right here. On the left, that's your standard symmetric BMR. The two spots are the same size. But on the right, that's an asymmetric BMR with an F value of 2.0. Notice how the following polarity, the white spot, is now bigger and more dispersed. That simple tweak makes the model look so much more like what we actually see on the sun.
And this is the hero plot of the paper. The black line, that's still reality. The red line is the super high-fidelity simulation using the fully realistic active regions. And now, look at that green line. That's the simulation using the new asymmetric BMRs, with an asymmetry factor of 2. It tracks the realistic simulation and the observations almost perfectly. The overestimation error, it's just gone.
So what does all this mean for us, for researchers who are actually building SFT models? Let's boil it down to the key takeaways. So if you remember one thing from this whole briefing, it should be this number, an asymmetry factor, F, of approximately 2. That's the sweet spot. That's what corrects the systematic overestimation that has plagued these models. Okay, so let's wrap this up with the key findings. First, and most importantly, the old method of using symmetric BMRs is fundamentally flawed. It causes major errors. Second, the fix is to introduce asymmetry, specifically a size ratio of about 2:1 between the polarities. This simple change just nails it. Now, of course, the authors are quick to point out that you still have to make sure the total magnetic flux in each region balances out, or you'll get other weird errors. And as a little bonus, they also validated a quick and dirty algebraic method that gives you a pretty good estimate for the axial dipole without having to run a full time-consuming simulation. A very handy shortcut. You know, this research provides such a powerful and simple new constraint for our models. And it really makes you wonder, right? If taking this one simple step toward realism can fix such a massive problem with the axial dipole, what other long-standing challenges, like modeling the equatorial dipole or even higher-order multiples, could we finally crack just by moving away from these overly idealized source models? I think that's the next big question for all of us.